Welcome to the Deep Dive. Here's a thought. What if the monumental shifts in human history, things like the fiery Protestant Reformation right up to the devastating world wars, weren't just chaotic accidents?
Mm.
What if they were actually interconnected pieces of some grand, unfolding providential plan? It's a fascinating lens to view our past, isn't it?
It truly is. I mean, most historical narratives, they focus on the political, the economic, social factors, the usual suspects.
Right.
But our source today, chapter5.pdf by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, it takes a distinctly theological approach. It offers this unique interpretation, framing these huge events as critical preparation for something else.
Something else be.
What it calls the second advent of the Messiah,
Yeah.
a future event.
Okay. So today our mission is basically to unpack this layered interpretation. We're going to explore how the source reinterprets historical periods, linking them to, deep internal human aspirations, external societal shifts, and even this kind of cosmic struggle between good and evil.
And a core part of this framework, as you'll see, involves these distinct Cain-type and Abel-type classifications.
Right, applied to ideologies, nations.
Yeah.
It's quite something. And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're here to help you understand this specific framework thoroughly, presenting the material as it's laid out in the text. We're not, taking sides here.
Absolutely. And to really get this, the source posits something called the providence of restoration. It's essentially God's ongoing plan, the idea goes, to correct humanity's course after past failures and bring about a perfected world.
So this journey of restoration, the source argues, influences pretty much everything that unfolds in history.
That's the premise, yes.
Okay, let's dive in then. The source identifies this big 400-year stretch from the Protestant Reformation, 1517, all the way to the end of World War I in 1918.
Yeah.
It calls this a crucial period of preparation for the second advent of the Messiah. That's a huge chunk of history.
It is, yeah. And it's further broken down. The source sees three distinct stages within this providence of restoration. First, the period of the Reformation itself, 1517 to 1648. Then the period of religious and ideological conflicts, from 1648 to 1789.
Right.
And finally, the period of maturation of politics, economy, and ideology, taking us from 1789 to 1918.
And the core idea linking all three.
The core idea is that this entire span was aimed at establishing a new foundation. A foundation for the second advent, basically rectifying failures from earlier points in this providential history. It's a very deliberate, almost patterned view of historical progression.
Okay, let's zoom in on that first stage then. The Reformation, 1517 to 1648. The source describes late medieval society as one where the original mind was repressed. What does it mean by original mind exactly, and how was it repressed?
Good question. The source suggests that our human original nature has both internal and external aspects. These align, it says, with what it calls God's dual characteristics. The original mind is sort of the internal compass guiding us towards God and truth. But during this period, its free development was blocked by feudalism and what the source terms the secularization and corruption of the Roman Church.
So religious life, which should be this direct connection.
Exactly, this vertical relationship between God and each individual, as the source puts it. It was constrained by the papacy, the clergy, these rigid rituals, dogmas. It created, a profound sense of disconnect for many.
And it wasn't just spiritual repression, was it? The source points out things like religious offices being bought and sold, leaders living in luxury, decadence even.
Right. It argues this caused the papacy to lose its sanctity, becoming just another worldly power, really. So the social environment itself was seen as preventing people from restoring that original nature.
Okay, so how does the restoration process work, according to this view?
Well, the source posits that God's restoration process mirrors creation. It moves from external to internal.
Yeah.
Like creating the physical self before the spiritual self.
I see.
So in this context, medieval Europeans were prompted sort of by these inner impulses to break down that stifling social environment, to restore their original nature.
And this leads us to a really core interpretive key in the source. The emergence of two branching movements from this pressure. It labels them Cain-type Hellenism and Abel-type Hebraism. How are these defined?
Yeah, this is crucial. The source uses Cain-type and Abel-type as these powerful symbolic lenses. It draws on the biblical story, where Cain, acting on his own will, essentially betrays divine guidance and harms Abel.
Right.
So in this framework, Cain type represents a path of deviation, often rooted in human-centered desires, maybe materialism, while Abel type aligns more with God's original purpose and spiritual focus.
Got it. So on the Cain side, we have the Renaissance.
Yes. The Cain type movement, the Renaissance. It was a revival of Hellenism, ancient Greek and Roman culture, philosophy with humanism right at its core. It pursued what the source calls external desires, freedom, autonomy, reason, scientific investigation, practical life.
Started in Italy.
Yeah, 14th century Italy, then expanded way beyond just culture. It became, as the source states, an external driving force for the construction of the modern world.
Okay. And the Abel type movement, that was the Protestant Reformation.
Exactly. A revival of the Hebraic heritage Israel, early Christianity centered on faith in God. It arose directly from grievances against the corrupt church, its ritualism, the denial of religious freedom, and this kind of otherworldly monastic ideal that didn't resonate with everyone.
And you had figures like Luther, Zwingli, Calvin.
Key figures, yeah. Leading movements against things like indulgences, pushing for a more direct relationship with God.
What's really telling is how the source ties these together. It says this period culminated in over 100 years of conflict, the wars of religion ending with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648.
Right. That treaty basically settled things geographically. Protestantism established itself in Northern Europe, Catholicism solidified in the South.
And the source notes that initially the Cain-type Hellenism, the Renaissance influence, kind of took a dominant position over the Abel-type Hebraism, the Reformation.
Which within this framework is seen as mirroring earlier historical patterns. The idea that Cain was meant to submit to Abel, but often didn't.
Okay, so with these initial spiritual and ideological fault lines established, how did the source then view the evolution of these divisions? How did they shape, modern political and philosophical thought in the centuries that followed? Let's move into that next period, 1648 to 1789, the period of religious and ideological conflicts.
Well, as people pursued both their internal spiritual desires and their external worldly ones, this period saw those divisions really deepen in theology and philosophy, everywhere, really. Leading to two distinct views of life, as the source calls them. And these, it argues, would eventually mature into the communist and democratic worlds we recognize today. It's like history, in this view, involves God repeatedly separating those representing Abel from those representing Cain, ultimately leading to a kind of last days division.
Okay, so what exactly defined this Cain-type view of life, according to the source?
The Cain-type view, as outlined here, grew pretty directly from Renaissance humanism. It elevated human dignity, the natural world, often over devotion to God.
Right.
This spurred modern philosophy. You get rationalism, Descartes, I think, therefore I am, emphasizing innate human reason. Then empiricism, Francis Bacon, holding that truth comes only through experience.
And these trends culminated in the Enlightenment.
Exactly. The Enlightenment directed human energy towards practical life and intended to discredit anything seen as irrational or otherworldly. That included, pointedly, belief in the biblical God. You even get deism, where God is just the creator who wound up the clock and walked away, basically.
Yeah. So this trajectory, humanism, Enlightenment, it eventually leads towards
left-wing Hegelianism, thinkers like Feuerbach, and then, crucially, Karl Marx. Marx systematized dialectical materialism, combined it with atheism and socialism, and voila, you have the foundations of communism.
And the source explicitly categorizes this whole lineage, humanism, through Enlightenment to Marxism as the Cain-type view of life.
Yes, leading people, in its words, towards Satan's realm. Now, it's important to understand what's meant by Satan's realm here.
Okay.
It's not necessarily about literal devil worship in this context. It's more about a trajectory of thought and societal development that, from the source's perspective, moves humanity further away from God's intended ideal, often through secularism, materialism, or the denial of spiritual reality itself.
Right. It's a classification within the specific theological framework.
Precisely.
Now, what about the Abel-type view of life during the same period, the counter-movement?
Well, the Abel-type view was this effort to revive Hebraism and early Christianity, focusing back on internal values. In philosophy, you have someone like Immanuel Kant.
Kant, okay.
He pioneered a path that kind of assimilated empiricism and rationalism, but argued that cognition is governed by the subjective mind. This laid groundwork for later idealist philosophers, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel.
And religiously, what was happening on the Abel side?
Religiously, New movements sprang up that stressed zeal and the inner life over just dogma. Things like Pietism in Germany, Methodism in England, both sparked these great spiritual revivals. You also had the Quakers emphasizing Christ as the inner light.
Right.
Even figures like Emanuel Swedenborg, a scientist whose spiritual senses supposedly awakened, investigating the spirit world. This whole path, the source says, guided modern people to seek God in a deeper way, and it eventually matured to form the democratic world.
So these two distinct worldviews are really solidifying now. As we move into our third period, 1789 to 1918, the maturation of politics, economy, and ideology, it sounds like these Kane-type and Abel-type ideologies started to coalesce into actual, tangible societal structures.
That's exactly right. The source explains that these ideologies, in a way, converged on one point.
Yeah.
Dismantling both medieval feudal society and the absolute monarchies that followed.
Why?
Because both systems, in different ways, had deprived people of religious freedom and constrained the rising citizen class. But once those old structures started falling, two very different types of democracy emerged.
One being the Kane-type democracy, the French Revolution being the key example.
Fueled by that Enlightenment thought, especially its atheistic and materialistic currents, it aimed to overthrow the ruling classes, feudalism, the whole lot. It established democracy, famously with the Declaration of the Rights of Man. But the source notes, despite its ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity, it tended towards totalitarianism. And crucially, it completely blocked the inclination of the human spirit to seek for God. This path, it argues, eventually systematized into Marxism and Leninism, forming the communist world.
Okay. And in contrast, the Abel-type democracy, arising from the English and American revolutions.
Fundamentally different, according to this view. Founded, it says, by sincere Christians who were fighting absolutism primarily for religious freedom.
Like the Puritans.
Exactly. The Puritan Revolution, the Glorious Revolution in England, leading to constitutional monarchy, and then the United States, formed in 1776 by persecuted Puritans and other dissenting Christians seeking freedom to practice their faith. These are presented as Abel-type democracies, the foundation of today's democratic world.
The source also offers a really interesting take on Montesquieu's idea of the separation of powers, legislative, executive, judicial. What's the deeper meaning there in this framework?
Yeah, this is fascinating. The source interprets it as a defective mimicking of God's ideal social structure.
A defective mimicking.
Yes. It posits that the ideal world's political structure will actually resemble a perfect human being. Institutions functioning like body organs, lungs, heart, stomach, all working harmoniously under the brain's command.
And the brain is?
God's guidance. Transmitted, he says, through Christ, who is likened to the spinal cord, and then through God-loving leaders who are like the peripheral nervous system or political parties.
Wow. Okay, so modern democracies, even with separation of powers,
are compared to a sick or injured person. Why? Because they lack that direct divine guidance. This, the source argues, leads to the constant conflict we see among the branches. The second advent of Christ, in this framework, would be the remedy, restoring that perfect function.
And this period also saw the Industrial Revolution take off. How does that fit into this providential view?
The source sees the Industrial Revolution as part of God's providence, too. A way to restore a pleasant living environment by advancing science and technology. It's about addressing what it calls external ignorance.
And the ideal economy. Is there a body analogy there, too?
There is. The ideal economic structure, it suggests, would also resemble a healthy human body, with organic production, distribution, consumption, avoiding destructive competition or unfair accumulation. The Industrial Revolution, while leading to mass production and colonialism, also crucially provided a vast territory for the propagation of the gospel.
So it served multiple purposes in this plan.
Right. The source even outlines this pattern of three renaissances for what it calls Satan's side, humanism, enlightenment, historical materialism, and parallel three stages of revolution for God's side in religion, politics, and industry, all seen as necessary steps towards building the ideal world.
Okay, now we arrive at perhaps the most intense part of this deep dive, the world wars. Seen not just as, horrific geopolitical conflicts.
No, but as the final chapters almost of a cosmic struggle. The source identifies four primary internal or providential causes for these wars.
Four causes, okay.
First, they represent Satan's last desperate struggle, his effort to preserve his sovereignty as God reclaims dominion over the world. You get these false imitations appearing before the true manifestations like the Antichrist before Christ.
Okay, Satan's last stand. What's second?
Second, these wars are seen as fulfilling worldwide indemnity conditions.
Indemnity conditions. Explain that again briefly.
They're like historical payments or prerequisites, actions needed on a global scale to rectify past spiritual failures, to pay a price, essentially, to restore things,
Restore what specifically?
to restore God's three great blessings. The source defines these as individual perfection, the ideal family, and dominion over creation. These are restored through three stages: formation, growth, completion, which the world wars correspond to.
Got it. Blessings, indemnity, stages, cause 3.
Cause 3 is about humanity collectively overcoming the three temptations Jesus faced in the wilderness, but now on a world level.
Interesting. And the fourth cause?
Fourth, the wars aim to restore God's sovereignty by having the Abel-type world prevail over the Cain-type world. This is seen as restoring, on a global scale, the original tragedy of Cain's murder of Abel.
And this framework provides specific criteria for deciding which nations are on which side, right? Cain or Abel?
Yes, and it's crucial to note, it hinges on their alignment with God's providence of restoration, as the source defines it. Not always on conventional moral judgments we might make today. For instance, materialistic thought, even if it seems ethical on the surface, is categorized as being on Satan's side.
Okay, let's apply this to the First World War. The source calls this the formation stage. Who's on which side?
According to the source, the Allied powers, Britain, the U.S., France, Russia, are categorized as Abel-type democracies on God's side, primarily because they were seen as Christian nations fighting against the persecution of Christians in the Ottoman Empire.
They're the Central Powers.
Turkey, Germany, Austria, Hungary, they were considered Cain-type authoritarian states on Satan's side, partly for supporting a Muslim nation seen as persecuting Christianity. Figures like Kaiser Wilhelm II are even identified as antitypes.
Antitypes, like a negative mirror image.
Yeah, exactly. Figures who defectively mimic a divine role, almost like a dark reflection of what should be. The Kaiser is seen as an antitype of Adam on Satan's side at this formation stage.
And the results of WWI in this view.
The Allied victory fulfilled the formation stage indemnity condition for those three great blessings and also for overcoming Jesus' first temptation. It laid the formation stage foundation for democracy and, significantly, for the birth of the returning Christ.
But at the same time,
communism was established in Russia, and Stalin begins his rise, identified here as the antitype of Christ at the second advent on Satan's side. So both sides are laying foundations.
Wow. Okay, moving to the Second World War. This is identified as the growth stage. The conflict is framed as democracy versus fascism.
Right. Fascism, Germany, Japan, Italy denied individual rights, freedoms, prioritized race or state, dictatorial leadership. The source states clearly it stemmed from that Cain-type view of life.
And the sides.
Allied democratic nations, the U.S., Britain, France, are on God's side. They were democracies, seen as supporting Christianity. The Axis fascist nations, Germany, Japan, Italy, are on Satan's side. Seen as anti-democratic and persecuting Christianity, think of Hitler's atrocities, Japanese forced Shinto worship, Mussolini using Catholicism for state control.
And there are antitypes here too, Hitler.
Yes, Hitler is described specifically as the satanic antitype of Jesus, and also as a kind of perfected Adam at the growth stage, but on Satan's side, perversely mimicking aspects of Jesus' life and those three blessings.
There's also this fascinating point about the Soviet Union, a nation the source puts on Satan's side, temporarily joining the Allies. How does that work?
Yeah, the source explains this by saying fascism was actually obstructing both God's long-term goals and Satan's immediate goal, which was for communism to grow. So the Soviet Union was allowed, providentially, to temporarily join the Allies to crush fascism. This let communism build its state. But as soon as the war was over, the source says the communist and democratic worlds separated like oil and water. The temporary alliance served its purpose.
So the results of World War II, providentially speaking.
Allied victory fulfilled the growth stage indemnity for the three blessings and for overcoming Jesus' second temptation. It laid the growth stage foundation for democracy. Hitler and his nation were destroyed.
But Stalin
And worldwide communism grew much stronger. This, according to the source, signaled the start of the age for building a new heaven and new earth under the leadership of Christ at the second advent. Things were accelerating.
Which brings us, finally, to the concept of a third world war, the completion stage. The source actually states it's inevitable.
Yes, inevitable, it says, to first divide and then ultimately unify the communist and democratic worlds. The final showdown, essentially.
But how would such a war be fought? Does it have to be nuclear annihilation.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The source outlines two possibilities. One is armed conflict, but it emphasizes that true unification requires internal submission and sincere reconciliation, not just military defeat. Force alone won't do it properly.
So the other possibility.
The other is a wholly internal ideological conflict, a war of ideas, basically. This, it says, could achieve the necessary submission and unification much more quickly if people respond rationally to what it calls a perfect ideology. And crucially, the way this conflict unfolds violently or ideologically depends, the source stresses, on human responsibility.
Human choice matters. So what kind of new ideology could possibly do this?
It's posited that this ideology must arise from the democratic, the able-type world, because conventional ideologies, it argues, simply can't defeat communism's philosophical roots. It will be a hitherto unknown ideology based on a new expression of the truth.
A new truth that might cause division itself initially.
Yes, the source suggests it might initially divide even the democratic world, but its ultimate purpose is to conquer dialectical materialism, communism's core philosophy, which is described as Satan's false imitation of the truth, because it denies God, denies even Satan itself, and leads humanity away from spiritual reality.
And Stalin, in this final stage, he's the ultimate antitype.
He's identified, yes, as the satanic antitype of Christ at the Second Advent. Idolized, mimicking the three blessings through things like the solidarity of workers and farmers, aiming for worldwide communist domination. Creating, the source says, a flawed imitation of the world of God's ideal.
So the purpose of this final conflict, this Third World War, whatever form it takes,
is to fulfill the completion stage indemnity for the three blessings, to overcome Jesus' third temptation, which relates to dominion over creation, and to lay the final completion stage foundation for God's sovereignty.
and the ultimate result, if successful.
The ultimate result, according to the source, is that victory in this final conflict will restore everything that was lost throughout history. It makes possible God's ideal world, a world characterized by interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. One unified world under God.
Wow. Okay, we've journeyed through centuries of history, haven't we? Exploring this really profound, intricate interpretation that sees a hidden providential design behind, well, everything. Human events, societal shifts, the rise of ideologies, global conflicts.
Yeah.
This deep dive into Chapter 5.pdf has presented a framework where historical events aren't just random occurrences, but part of this grand narrative, all leading toward a very specific future.
It's certainly a lot to consider. This idea that these huge historical forces, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the World Wars, communism, democracy, are all interconnected parts of such a detailed cosmic plan. It really does recontextualize much of what we learn as conventional history, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And perhaps the most provocative thought the source leaves us with is about that ultimate Third World War. The idea that it might not be a battle of armies, but a war of ideas.
An ideological conflict.
Right. One that could potentially lead to global unification. It makes you wonder, what might such a new truth even look like? And how could our choices, human responsibility, shape whether this final conflict is fought with words or with weapons? It really leaves us to consider the immense power of ideas to shape history, to shape the future, and maybe what role we ourselves might play in understanding or even contributing to that kind of evolution. A lot to think about.